Hello there, and welcome to the CP7 podcast. My name's Palm.
And I'm Andy.
And together, we are Chrono Passion 7. Hello, and welcome to a very special show. Today, we have another very special guest. He has the looks of a movie star, the voice of a radio star, managing editor of Fratello. We have Nacho Conde. How are you, Nacho? How are you doing?
Yeah, thank you very much. Thanks for having me. I don't know about the looks of a movie star. I think it's more of a face for radio, but but at least the voice I've also heard is good on radio. So hopefully the audio listeners will be able to enjoy, and the video listeners will be able to just bear with us as they're exposed to the full reality of what's happening before them. No, thank you guys very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be on, and yeah, looking forward to having a chat with you guys.
It's a pleasure to have you on the show, and a warm welcome from myself. And as the guest of honor, Nacho, I've got to ask a question. What's on your wrist today?
Oh yes, of course. We couldn't skip the wrist check. So today I've actually gone with the watch that I've been almost wearing daily lately, which is the Tudor Pelagos FXD, the one I sort of nickname USN. It's not an official Tudor licensed nickname, but of course it's the black dialed model with the Pelagos text in red. And yeah, it's just a watch I've been enjoying a lot. I traded a watch that I had for it, and yeah, it's been kind of no looking back and really just looking for excuses to wear other watches. Today's a Tuesday, so could have been a Speedy Tuesday opportunity. But hey, I'm just I'm keeping it real and wearing the watch I'm excited to wear. So it's the Pelagos for me. So how about you guys? What have you got on your wrist? Let's start with you, Parm. What have you got?
As it is Tuesday today that we're recording on, I haven't got a Speedy, but I've got an Omega Seamaster Pro, 300 meters, the white dial with black ceramic bezel, the Great White, the newer version of the Great White. I believe there's an older one. Mm-hmm, It's one of my favorite watches. It's summer, and so it's time to get this watch out and on the wrist.
Brilliant. Love that white dial Seamaster. That's to me. We had them in at Fratello a little while ago, and that's to me, I would say one of the best ones, if not the best one.
I think it's the best, actually. Yeah.
Very, very nice. Perfect. And what about you, Andy? What are you rocking today?
I'm a bit of a vintage guy. As most of our listeners know, I've gone for a Rolex Tropical Dial 1007 OP. You can't, unfortunately, for Nacho, you can't see the Tropical Dial so well in the shot. I'll show you a picture later, but the dial is really the star of the show on this. But yeah, it's impossible on this camera, but I'll show you later. All the listeners know this piece, similar to you and the FXD, I just can't take it off the wrist.
Isn't it great when that happens, right? It makes your life a lot easier. You don't have to have a bit of a crisis moment every single morning when you look in your watch box. You just know what you're going to go with, and you know, you hope it lasts and that you can just enjoy that one watch for a while. But hey, sooner or later you do circle back around and feel a bit guilty about not wearing some of the other ones. So
yeah,
absolutely. Well, this is very rare for Andy. He's normally gone in.
It's a record.
60 seconds.
I don't want to.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm a terrible swap. I swap all of my watches all the time, and I had words with myself. I'm not doing it anymore, and I'm lasting so far. I'm doing well. So it was bad. It was like
safe space.
Yeah, it was.
We have
an
nothing
addiction.
but understanding. Fantastic.
Okay, let's get into this. So, what I didn't mention was that Nacho is a keen and avid photographer, a professional photographer, no less. A question I have for you, Nacho, and I'm sure so many people want to hear about photography, as we were discussing earlier on in the back room, it is the mystic art of the watch world. How do you get those amazing pictures? But let's talk about yourself a little bit before we get into all that. So how did you get into watches and photographing them? I mean, which way round was it? Was it watches first or photography first?
Yeah, I think it's always good to have a bit of a chat before we delve into the mystic arts. It's you don't want to just go right into the mystic arts, right? It removes a lot of the mystery involved. So good to have a bit of a chat first. It's actually hard for me to say. I remember watches as a kid. I remember being fascinated by them early on, even going back to a schoolmate who had a Casio F91W, which was also my first watch. So seeing him have that watch on his wrist in school and seeing the backlight, speaking of some things that seemed like magic back in the day. But yeah, then there was a bit of a brief period, I would say, when I was a teenager where watches were just not that much of a priority. But photography really became, I think it's fair to say, a bit of a passion of mine. With my first paycheck, I went and I bought a camera, a DSLR, and immediately knew how to use it. I'd been down the rabbit hole of YouTube tutorials and had sort of self-taught how to use the camera before I even had it. I believe the second paycheck was a watch. So these things have always kind of coexisted in my interest, and very lucky to be able to combine them now in what I do for a living, of course. And it's a very fortunate position, of course, to be able to do something creative, something involving watches, but also tied into my other passion being photography as well.
Awesome. Andy?
So Nacho, getting into the photography side in a bit more detail with the subject of watches, of course, what's the ideal scene for you when shooting watches? What do you prioritize most? Is it the location where you're shooting the watch? Or is it making sure you have the most perfect lighting in an environment where you can control the lighting in the studio, for example? Or for you, is it just being out there on an adventure and just getting that perfect moment to get that shot? Linking round to a second part of that question as well, which are some of your most memorable shots you've taken and some of the favorite pieces which link back to those memories?
That's a great question. I mean, I think ideally, I think in the studio you can get some fantastic results. And a lot of the time with the work that we do for Fratello, it is mostly studio photography. But of course, I like getting out there as much as I can. And my personal preference and what I sort of grew up with and where I learned was just using natural light, basically. So I'll use any excuse I can get to get out there and use whatever light I can get. Obviously, the ideal scenario could be in a studio, but I think also being next to a big window, a big bright window with some diffused light on a cloudy day, you can get some fantastic results. So yeah, I've experienced a plethora of non-ideal scenarios at watch fairs and watch shows and watch boutiques where you have all kinds of colorful lights coming from all angles and this kind of thing. And there you just basically have to roll with the punches, work with it, do some of the editing in post. Yeah, basically work with what you have. So that's the thing. It's ideally you have some great natural light, a great backdrop, and just use what you have. But working in the studio with some good props and some decent light is also a way to go. That said, I think some of my most memorable shots have been taken over the course of last summer, and that perhaps includes also during the launch of the Pelagos FXD, which took place in Panama City Beach, Florida. And it involved a little bit of scuba diving and a little bit of underwater photography as well. So that was a bit of a first experience in underwater photography. I picked up a very cheap setup, a Panasonic point and shoot camera, and a little underwater casing that goes down to 40 meters, and still a point and shoot, but it gets good results. So there is one photo that I took for that article of the FXD where it's sitting about 20 meters deep in the Gulf of Mexico, sitting on top of the wreck of an old US Army hovercraft with fish swirling around in the background. Yeah, the color turned out well thanks to the built-in flash on the camera. And other than that, another example could be the Hamilton Khaki Expedition. I was there for the launch of it in September of last year, and at one point, the lovely folks at Hamilton basically gave me a watch roll with all the watches in it and let me loose into the mountains near Zermatt and said, "Yeah, go crazy, just be back in time by lunch." And I was able to wander off down a trail and take the watches with me. So yeah, and basically watches under one arm, camera over the shoulder, and yeah, just made the most of it and found a little waterfall. It's nice to be able to just get out there and roll with the punches, see what you can find. And the studio work is predictable, but it's always fun to really get out and, play it by ear and get some fun results for sure.
Awesome. That's brilliant. And I think you answered another question, what was in the back of my mind, which was how much does it matter how good the camera is? But from what you said, just shooting with a point and shoot basic Panasonic, you can get the job done. So as long as the shot looks good, the camera doesn't matter quite as much, maybe.
That's true. I tend to be I define myself as a bit of a self-sabotaging photographer because I tend to shoot with, I still use the same camera that I started shooting for Instagram. It's a Olympus Pen EPL8. It's a system camera, so you can interchange lenses. It has a manual mode, but it's I think it set me back like 160 euro, something like that. I've spent a little bit of money on lenses since then, but yeah, ultimately, as long as the sensor is good enough and the light is good enough and the lens is the right one, then you're going to get some good results. Obviously, I've also since then dabbled with some nicer full frame high-end cameras. And then the nice thing about it is, of course, you get an image that you can really work with. You can really blow it up to whatever proportions you want. Chase Jarvis, a famous photographer from Seattle, his philosophy, which is the best camera is the one you have with you. something that's become a bit of a cliche, but ultimately it's the truth, because it's just better to have the picture than to not have the picture. And it's a little plasticky point and shoot. I actually realized I have it here on my desk. So it's this, the underwater housing looks very impressive, of course, but inside it's just a cheap point and shoot from 2011, something like that. It's completely outdated technology. And as much as the next guy would love to have a Leica SL in an underwater housing that I could use to take these pictures, but you also just go with what you have. And there's the slightly less impressive. You guys remember these cameras?
Oh yes, definitely. I think I had that one. It's a Panasonic. Which one is it for the listeners at home? What are you showing us, Nacho?
Oh yeah, it's well, I'm reading here at the top. It says DMC-ZS8. So that's what it is.
By Panasonic.
Again, bought purely because that's what I found that fit the casing and gets the job done. You can get some fun pictures with it. But of course, the better the equipment, the better the pictures. But sometimes it's just about getting the picture with what you have, and yeah, it works just as well.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. Andy and I were just talking yesterday. We saw an article you wrote in Oracle Time about the best camera to use, and we were talking about the Olympus pen. And it was like, you know what? This because we've been talking about getting a point and shoot camera each too, because that on the spot photography, you need to catch that moment. And we've just got big full frame cameras, which you can't carry around too clunky. But I was saying the Olympus pen, that looks really cool. Andy's going, yeah, I've looked into that. Just adding on to what you just said there about the studio shot and the going on shoot on location shot. What, and this is additional to the question I was going to ask you, what do you do when you're out and about, you haven't planned, you haven't gone on an assignment to take pictures for Fratello, but you're out and about and you see something, you think, right, I want to take that watch shot now. What would you do? What's your process? How do you make it look awesome?
It's kind of a case by case, right? So it depends where you find yourself. If it's a cloudy day, you can just be just about anywhere. But you want to look out for reflections, maybe like harsh colors. So if you're walking around town and you stand by a shop front that has very bright colors, then maybe you're going to get some nasty reflections on the watch case. But for the most part, if you're in a park and you're getting some good diffused light, you can basically go anywhere. For me, what I like to do if I'm taking a wrist shot is basically just put the watch sort of as close to your lower chest or your torso as possible, with a little bit of distance still, and then you do what they call a parrot shot on Instagram, which is that you sort of lean your camera over your shoulder or onto your shoulder, and you shoot down from it, creating a bit of depth of field using your jacket, and then you try to select a background that fills in a little bit as well. Like you have to really think about those three elements of the photo, right? The foreground, the subject, and the background. I think that as soon as you develop a bit of a consciousness for all three factors, and obviously taking the light into consideration as one of the most important things, then you're able to just have a lot of fun and try and look for different backgrounds. If I'm taking the watch off my wrist, it's autumn and it's just beautiful fallen leaves, really nice colors everywhere. I like to try and find a soft spot to lay the watch down. And if it's, say, like a bridge with a wooden handrail or something like that, it's always a bit risky, right? You always have that intrusive thought of, yeah, what if I gently lay the watch down and it just rolls off the bridge into the water? I say in that case, you have to be prepared to jump in for it, I guess. But no, for the most part, I might take something like a leaf and put it down if you're shooting on top of a brick wall or something like that, or just place the watch down gently. And then, yeah, you sort of also then would look for some nice depth of field, some good light. Just make sure that the dial is a little bit angled upwards and you get a bit of good light. And yeah, other than that, just avoiding harsh light. Though direct sunlight can be good. Photography is one of these things where there's a lot of rules, but they can all be broken with pretty good effect. So yeah, you just are always looking, always shooting. And I tend to be the kind of person who shoots a lot and edits very little and posts even less. So I think that that's also good advice. It's not a film camera, unless it is. But if it's digital that you're working with, get a big memory card and just shoot as much as you want, right? I mean, the more you shoot, the better you get. So that would be also my advice.
Okay, for sure. It's good advice for me. Post less. Seeing some of the pictures I take, but
maybe not post less, but you know, I mean, you got to pick the shots, right? You got to pick the winners. And I mean, for me on Instagram, I still post every single day. I've been doing so for just over 3 years at this point. So keep the streak going. I'll miss one every now and then during Watches and Wonders. Maybe if things get a little hectic and it's quite a long day, I'll realize the next morning at breakfast and do a little quick post while getting some breakfast down. But happens very rarely.
Our listeners, we have avid photographers and we have people
Yes.
new to who are befuddled by the mystic arts. Apart from light now, which you've obviously gone through quite considerably, what are the most important factors and challenges to consider for a beginner or someone slightly experienced to take into consideration, and what's the best way to combat those or overcome them?
Right. Yeah, I would say if you're a beginner, you can learn a lot just by shooting on your phone, right? If you have a phone, you have a camera, and there's a lot that you can do with it, messing around with basic exposure settings. I mean, most phones will have a bit of an advanced shooting mode where you can mess with settings a little bit. And then challenges, yeah, I think it's a lot of the time it's about getting the right kind of basic kit and then just getting to grips with it. A lot of what I enjoy is using a camera that I know very well and that I'm very comfortable with using. And something that I really don't do well with is trying out new gear. I ultimately do enjoy it, but every time that I feel that it's time for an upgrade, which clearly it is, but I'm just ignoring the clock. But I really dread going into that state of learning and feeling like you're on the back foot, right? Like, so I would say you just have to familiarize yourself with the camera, right? You should be able to use it with your eyes closed almost, right? Like you should know where the buttons are and what they do and set it up in a way that works for you, right? It doesn't have to be what everybody else says. But yeah, and then other than that, yeah, make sure the crystal isn't smudged. That's always good advice, I would say. For beginners and professionals alike, take a second to do a bit of a sleeve wipe of the crystal and get all that dust off before you shoot. It's going to save you a lot of time in post-processing. Yeah, just shoot a lot, take a lot of pictures, try and get a feeling for what works and what doesn't work. Realize that it's just about trial and error a lot of the time. Also, don't be afraid to try out less expensive equipment, I would say. Like if you're on Amazon, you can get a pretty decent LED panel with a little diffuser. And a lot of people are surprised by the setup that I carry around for a trade show. And it's basically just a round diffuser, a single LED panel with a small tripod that you can set on top of a desk and a white piece of cardboard for reflections. Then you just use whatever you can get your hands on as a prop, get some nice diffused light, reflect it from the other side, make sure it's sort of coming in from both sides of the watch. And you have the benefit of having the steady light, which means that what you see in front of you is the result you're going to get. So what you see through the camera's viewfinder or on the camera screen is it gives you a good idea of what you're going to get. And then, yeah, apart from that, a lot of trial and error. Oh, and don't hesitate to use aperture priority mode. I think that's a good tip. I use that all the time. If you don't want to use manual mode and fiddle around with everything all the time, just set your aperture. Maybe don't open the lens up all the way. Just keep it at, like, depending on the maximum aperture, go with a f3, something like that, f3.5, f4, and then you're going to get a lot more in focus. It's going to be a lot sharper, and you just have to find the right balance for what works for you in terms of depth of field and sharpness and this kind of thing. But aperture priority mode, then it does all the rest of the thinking for you, right? Basically get the camera to do the work so you don't have to do it yourself.
Right. Okay. So aperture priority, that's the one, people. If you're beginning and you want better pictures, prioritize that aperture.
Yes.
I think it's a thing, right, with manual mode where it's kind of like you're not professional until you use it. But to be fair, you can get so many amazing shots just in auto point and shoot.
Yeah, for sure.
You kind of sparked a little additional question from my side, and I think it would help myself and Palm quite a lot as well. So maybe a selfish question, but I'm sure it will help many of our listeners as well. One of the biggest nightmares, you did touch on it, is trade shows. Or another example would be maybe you go into a Red Bar event, you're at a boutique, you're trying to get a great shot. And as you know, the biggest problem with boutiques or trade shows is spotlights everywhere, reflections everywhere. Do you have a trick to minimize some of those reflections from the spotlight? Or is it you just have to put up with it? Do you have any little trick what you'd carry around with you to try and minimize that?
Yeah, I think obviously it depends on the specifics of the place you find yourself. Sometimes it's just a matter of trying to get as close to the window, if there is a window, right, as possible. and kind of use your own body. If you're taking a wrist shot, to kind of lean your shoulder over so that you try to block out as many as you can. Sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. You have to be a little bit mindful of looking out for the light pollution, let's say. Natural light tends to be quite blue, and artificial light tends to be quite yellow in contrast. So you can see if the watch has these sort of golden reflections on it that almost make the steel case look like it's gold, or it makes it look a little bit orange. It's going to throw off the shot a little bit. Sometimes you can sort that out in post with a little bit of an edit on Lightroom. And then another tool, of course, I referred to it just a second ago. It's one of these diffusers, like a pop-out diffuser. You can buy one of these for 5 to 10 euros, pounds, or whatever on Amazon, and it just pops out. It's this basically a big circle made out of some sort of slightly transparent cloth material, and it's going to diffuse the light, and then basically make sure that you don't have the spots shining brightly. It'll diffuse all the light. It'll even things out a little bit. And then I would say, other than that, one of the options would be to shoot with flash, because with flash, you're basically just underexposing completely and creating your own light. But of course, for a red bar in a trade show, it can be a little bit intrusive, because you don't want to be the guy with the flash going off the whole time. Some people do that and they get incredible results. But you just, at that point, you want to be quite good at using the flash. You don't want to be doing your trial and error phase with flash, because you're just going to end up annoying everybody. But yeah, I know that some of the guys who come to the trade shows do use flash pretty effectively. Thankfully, they get it spot on with just a couple shots, so they're not annoying you when you're trying to do a bit of a wrist roll for Instagram or something like that, and you just have the flashes going off in the background. But yeah, I think that's it. Try to get as close to a window as possible. Try and block them out, especially if you're doing a wrist shot, and then if not, just take a little diffuser. Or if you're at a red bar meeting, take the restaurant menu, take a napkin, have somebody hold the restaurant napkin over the watch. It will diffuse the light somewhat. I mean, it's not ideal, but hey, it's better than nothing, right? So that would be
that's great advice.
Some well-meant advice.
Yeah, no, it's brilliant. That's the biggest distorter of most pictures I've taken at these shows or at red bar events, is just light destroying my shot. So yeah, I'm going to buy one of those pop-up diffusers. Great advice.
Yeah, they're great.
Yeah, I'm already on.
Yeah, Pam's already bought it.
I'm already on Amazon.
Perfect. Just make sure to use my my affiliate link.
Oh, okay. Yeah, we'll drop it in the.
I don't have one of those. I don't have one of those.
Yeah, just you ever put a link in the description? Okay, you better create one and we'll put it in.
Yeah.
Okay, so use the flash. You'll get great pictures, but you just won't be popular.
Exactly. But also, if you're using flash, you kind of want to. It depends. Don't use the flash on your phone, because the light comes from the same direction as the lens, which means it's going to flatten everything. You remove all the shadows, you remove all that nice texture. It's probably going to reflect right off the glass of the watch and bounce right back. I think flash is really quite an advanced thing. You want to point it either upwards if you have a proper flash for your camera. The Olympus has a little hot shoe pop-up flash, but I think you can only point it forward, so it's also pretty useless. But you would want to point it upwards and bounce it off of a white surface. If there's a white ceiling above you, it's going to work really well. It's going to basically light up the ceiling for that split second and give some really good bounce light. But I would say also, just don't be afraid to look at tutorials on YouTube. There's so many great channels out there doing incredible photography tutorials, and it's how I did a lot of my learning. Other than the trial and error, there was a lot of watching hours and hours and hours of YouTube tutorials from the likes of Jared Polin, who goes by Fro Knows Photo on YouTube. He did some great tutorials. I watched a lot of his videos when I was learning many, many years ago. Never be afraid to learn via the online resources that are available as well.
Okay, great. Thanks. Great answer to that question. Very informative. And I think a lot of people will be tapping away at their keyboards to find a lot of these things you're telling us, which is awesome.
Lots of references.
So now we have the skills down. We have some advice on how to take better pictures. So my next question would be for the listeners who would maybe be thinking to take the professional route like yourself. What advice would you give to them to, one, be seen? So a lot of that's already in, take lots of pictures, make sure you're taking great shots, just keep practicing. But how would you say you get into a brand such as Fratello, being the photographer for them, as an example? Obviously, there's many others, but what advice would you give for people wanting to take that professional route into making watch photography their career?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I'm sure that there's no, like, let's say, one single path answer to everybody out there, right? But I think I can speak from my own experience, which is basically just do the thing and do it a lot, right? I started my Instagram separate to my private Instagram to not annoy all of my friends and family with my watch pictures. And very quickly, I realized that there was a massive community out there, the so-called the hashtag WatchFam, right? And on social media, and that those people are super welcoming and super kind, super open-minded. I very quickly made some contacts with people on social media, right? Never be afraid to send somebody a DM, myself included. Most of us are just happy to share the passion and to be able to not annoy our partners with with the conversation and to take it online, take it somewhere else. But yeah, just learn how to do it and put your work out there. I mean, social media, especially Instagram, I would say is a great way to do it. Tag people in your pictures, use all the hashtags. A lot of the time, the best way to do it is to look at what other people are doing it. Imitation is the best form of flattery. So you try to create and emulate what other people are doing. And a lot of the time, you'll learn a lot in the process. And you might not get exactly to where other people are. For me, there's certain people out there whose work is still a bit of a mystery to me. They're far more advanced or just have a completely different style or a different eye than I do. But I would say that just put your work out there on social media, get in touch with people, and keep your ear on the ground for opportunities, right? I mean, you never know when we might be hiring. Basically, all the big titles tend to be on the up and up and growing almost exponentially. And, we're always looking for talented, passionate people who can either write or take pictures or provide some sort of value in what they do. So I would say that's the best way to do it, is just learn, post a lot on social media, and don't be afraid to share your work. And you'll see, looking back very quickly, you'll realize how far you've come. And maybe you get lucky and you take the opportunity and it's the right time in the right place. And that old cliche, right? That luck is just when preparation meets opportunity. So a lot of the time, that's just how it goes.
Yeah, fantastic advice.
Yep. So people, if you want a job, drop Nacho an email. No, I don't open the floodgates.
No, I don't think I can promise anything. I mean, it's funnily enough, as we are recording this, we are currently in the process of hiring a new photographer for Fratello. So it is kind of interestingly almost perfect timing, but at the same time, we're also just looking for somebody local here in the Netherlands, where Fratello is based, and we already have a few candidates coming in actually this week as we record this. Not to date the show too much, but yeah, so chances are that then that position will be filled. But hey, this person who has been our photographer for the last year and 5 months, whose name is Morgan, he's on Instagram, Morgan Seigne on Instagram. He's done an incredible job. And yeah, now through just decisions having to do much more with his life and his personal endeavors, is moving away from where we're based onto new opportunities. So right now we're hiring people, but I'm sorry to say, chances are, if you're listening to this, it's probably already too late, but you never know, right? It can always be available
the
again.
Next one.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's interesting. When we met you, when we came to see you guys in The Hague, Morgan had just started, I think.
True. Yeah, it was March of last year, I believe. So yeah, it must have been around that time for sure.
Yeah.
Well, there you go. We've gone full circle.
Yes.
So, okay, next time, listeners, keep the faith.
Hey, the opportunities are there, right? As you can see, it's sort of a case in point, right?
Exactly. So to keep in line with watches now, because that's our game ultimately, if you could design the perfect watch for photography, what would that be? What kind of watch would it be? And what would be the features it had that would just make it easy? Let's say instead of perfect, the easiest watch to photograph.
Yes.
What would that be?
Yeah, so there's a few features that would really do lend themselves well to a watch being incredibly or a lot easier to photograph. I mean, saying it's incredibly easy to photograph is probably making it a little bit lighter of a task that can be trickier than it might seem, actually, especially given the circumstances. But I would say Tudor have actually come fairly close in designing a perfectly photogenic watch.
Wow.
In the Pelagos line in general. I would say probably the most easiest to photograph is likely the Alinghi Red Bull watch, but then any watch that has a matte case, and especially if it's a matte black case, it's going to be pretty easy to photograph. Obviously, the sort of very lightly brushed, almost matte titanium is also really quite conducive to photography because it just avoids reflections. Likewise, these watches all have a flat crystal, so it really also avoids reflections, and it's got fantastic anti-reflective coating, which means that you avoid seeing reflections on the crystal. It's really legible, visible, and that means that the camera also is able to see all that detail perfectly well without too many annoying reflections. But yeah, I would say for me personally, it would be a watch on a strap, because a bracelet is just is a lot more work when it comes to reflections and angles and laying the watch flat. My gosh, I would say actually an Omega had succeeded in creating a fantastic watch for usage on the moon by astronauts, but a horrible watch to photograph. I say that the Speedmaster, as much as we love it, is one of the worst watches to photograph out there.
Even the Hesalite.
Oh, it's a nightmare. The Hesalite is a complete nightmare. It reflects everything. It does this. It's beautiful, right? It's a fantastic how it plays with the light, but it's just also just a nightmare to shoot. It creates these internal reflections and refractions in direct light. And the Speedmaster with these beautiful sort of twisted lugs, which are polished, so they just reflect everything at every possible angle that they take. So it really is one of the trickier watches to shoot. But it's also one of the more rewarding watches to shoot, right? I mean, it's the kind of watch that when you do get it right and you get it looking good, it just shines. But yeah, I would say the FXD is a pretty easy to photograph watch. Breitling watches in titanium are also pretty good to photograph. And another one that comes to mind as an absolute, on the opposite end, is an absolute nightmare is the Hamilton khaki field auto. Because that thing has no AR coating whatsoever. It's got a domed sapphire crystal and a black dial underneath. And then to boot, it has this polished bezel all the way around that very reflective crystal.
To make it harder.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's an all-around tricky watch to shoot. But yeah, another perfect watch to shoot is anything from Zinn, because it's also really good AR, typically like bead blasted titanium or black PVD. Those are always going to be great to shoot. So yeah, I think that would be it. And a dial that's not too busy. Yeah, I think that would be several factors that would make a watch pretty ideal to shoot for sure.
Okay, so when you mentioned the Alinghi, the Tudor FXD Alinghi, you mean the time only, not the chronograph one, obviously, because there's more details, or is it the same?
Both work quite well, because I was thinking mostly of the black carbon composite case, because it just, at least in very bright light, it's quite easy to photograph. If you shoot it on a darker background, it's going to have a little bit more trouble standing out from a darker background. But to be honest, that's those two Alinghis, and now of course the Tudor cycling FXD chronograph. I haven't had hands on with it yet, but I suppose that'll be a pretty good one to shoot as well. To be honest,
so that's your favorite. So you've answered two questions I was going to ask you. The favorite is the Tudor Alinghi, and your least favorite is, not saying least favorite, but the one you find hardest to shoot is the Omega Speedmaster.
Yes, I'd say it's a tie for first place between the Speedmaster and the Hamilton khaki auto, right? I mean,
Hamilton, of course.
Those two are tied for first place. I could imagine if you want to look at something even worse, Bulgari released this Sejima collaborative Octofinissimo that was completely mirror polished. Zenith has done one. Now there was this Isotope released in collaboration with Revolution that was also, it has a mirror polished dial. So that kind of watch is always going to just be incredibly tricky to photograph, right? The more reflective it is, the trickier it will be to shoot, for sure.
Okay, well, that's interesting stuff. Food for thought.
So my final question, what would be your top 3 watches you would love to shoot, which you haven't had the opportunity to do so yet?
Okay, yeah, that's a good one. And then I think with that, it would bring me into some vintage watches. I've never had the chance to shoot something like a Universal Geneve pole router, and I think that to be honest, I don't know if it would be shooting it or just seeing that watch in person. There's some incredibly beautiful models out there. And then apart from that, yeah, I would say, other watches I'd love to shoot. Well, that Tudor cycling FXD would be nice to get some shots of. But yeah, I think looking at another watch, it would be one of my grails, which is a Rolex Explorer 16570, which has a white dial. Actually, that's also a bit of a hack to making life a little bit easier. If the watch has a white dial, it's not going to be as susceptible to reflections, because it's a lot lighter and a black dial will reflect a lot more. So that's a great one to shoot. I've shot one once before, but still a watch I'd love to be able to shoot on my wrist every single day, maybe someday. And apart from that, man, I don't know. Maybe something like a Ploprof worn by somebody in Jacques Cousteau's team, or one of the Breitling Emergencies worn by Picard. I don't know, something like this, right? It's just a watch with some incredible heritage, a Comex sub that was actually used by somebody from Comex, an issued Tudor Submariner, something like this. And maybe just an old British military Omega diver from the early 60s. I mean, then you could really nerd out and just admire the heritage of the thing in front of you, as well as to take some great pictures. I think something like that you could just not go wrong with.
Yeah, brilliant response. You've given an insight into what kind of collector you are, I think, and kind of personality. So one, you've given your perfect ideal watches to shoot, which you still haven't yet. You've also told us your grail. So we found the grail piece out. And to me, it seems like you're more of an adventurer. So you like watches what have seen action, what have a story, have some real historic connection. So thank you for that insight.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, thanks. Happy to share. I mean, that's what watches should be really all about. In the end, it's something, it's not strictly necessary, right? I mean, when you leave the house, if you're not wearing a watch, no one's going to look at you twice thinking it's odd. If you're not wearing trousers, it might be a bit different, and then in your day-to-day life, you leave your house without your phone, and sadly, you might feel a bit disconnected. But if you leave your house without a watch and you have your phone with you, then you're just fine because you have all that information. But ultimately, it's about sharing special moments with your watches, adding meaning beyond what a product might be, and yeah, I think that one way to really do that is to just get out there and live with your watches, take them on adventures, do memorable things with them, and also don't take for granted that if you wear a watch every single day in your day to day, what might seem a bit trivial, you're still going to grow attached to it. So it's really all about spending time with them, doing memorable things, and finding the watches you truly like and that you want to see every time you look down at your wrist, basically.
Brilliant.
Wow, excellent. So I'm going to ask another question, because it's very interesting talking to yourself about this stuff. Which watch that you've owned and let go of have you missed the most, and why?
Yeah, that's a good one. I have to say, I haven't let go of a lot of watches. I'm a bit of a hoarder in that sense. I tend to really stick to most things. But I have let go of a couple in the past. One of them that kind of is memorable is this old vintage Alpina, I believe from sometime in the 50s. It had fixed lugs. It was a very dressy 34.5 millimeter gold-plated dress watch with a beautiful glossy black dial and these almost like Patek Calatrava indices and beautiful Dauphine hands. I have a couple of pictures of it. And I mentioned it recently on one of the episodes of Fratello Talks. But that watch I bought when I was a student, very, very cheap, and flipped it for, I think, almost 5 times what I paid for it. And we're talking $50 into like $400, right? It wasn't really something life changing. But as a student, it was it was a lot of beer money, so that was good. But then in hindsight, you think, yeah, I kind of wish I still had that watch. Yeah, other than that, I don't think I've really sold too many watches. I traded for the FXD. I traded a Panerai for it. I had a Panerai PAM 55, which is a titanium model from the early 2000s with a deep chocolate brown dial, which was a really nice watch. But that kind of came into my ownership by chance in some way. It was just a really good deal that I spotted online and basically jumped on it. So in a way, the FXD having a little bit more meaning to do with this trip that we went to Florida to see its release, as well as just in general being a fantastic watch. So far, no regrets there, but you never know. And then other than that, because I got started collecting fairly inexpensive vintage pieces, I've managed to hold on to just about everything that I picked up. And just because it's not really worth selling it. It's so inexpensive that it wouldn't really be worth flipping it now. So all the watches you could call like heirloom watches. I'm lucky enough to have a couple that were owned by my grandfather. Those, as special to me and not to anybody else as they may be, they just deserve a spot, even if it's in the back of the closet somewhere. Not getting a lot of wrist time, but certainly not being sold for a small profit.
Not going anywhere.
Exactly. Yeah, I'll hang on to those.
Watches mean a lot to you and you like to keep them.
Yeah, to a fault. I'm the kind of guy who will be like, I'll cut the extra of a NATO strap, like the little second keeper, and I'll just put it in a drawer. I'll be like, I might need this later. I'm going to keep this just in case. And now what I've actually started doing them is I'll use them as bookmarks. I'll take the little extra piece of the NATO and you have the loop sticking out of the top of the book, and then the tail end of it is quite a handy, fits well between two pages, and it turns out that you can turn your hoarding habits into product development in some way. That's what I tell myself.
Almost a business in that, Nacho. You can
for sure.
start a unique. I don't see nobody else does that.
Exactly. Just call it bookmarks. It's not trash.
Exactly.
It definitely shouldn't be in the trash. That's what I keep telling myself.
Okay. Well, that's been awesome. I hope everyone's learned something from Nacho today. I certainly have, and I'm sure Andy has too. But thank you for joining us, Nacho. It's been great to chat, and hopefully we can get you on the show again soon sometime.
Yeah, it's been absolutely my pleasure. It's been great speaking with you guys, and yeah, let's do it again sometime in the future.
Thank you so much, Nacho. Thank you.
Awesome.
I'll do my classic sign off. So as always, please make sure to follow us on Instagram. So that's chrono_passion_7. Hopefully we can persuade Nacho to send us some of his famous shots, which we have discussed during the show today. We'd love to share those pictures, of course, with your credit. For the show notes, the website is, of course, www.chronopassion7.com for our listeners to see those great pictures. And Pan, be happy. I'm going to sign off. So that's adios from Barcelona from me.
And it's farewell from Andy from Spain. It's goodbye from Nacho from the Netherlands. Check out Fratello Talks on YouTube and on your favorite podcatcher. And from London, it's Toodle Pip and laters, and we'll see you and you'll hear us in the next one.